people who have these more narrow faces and narrow noses, in general, will respond better. And there's actually a maneuver you can do, all of you can do right now. Let me show you. This is called the Cotto maneuver. So what you do is you take 2 fingers, put it right next to your nose alongside your nostril, and then while pressing gently on your face, lift up and out, and breathe in. Can you breathe much better? Yeah, I see a lot of nods, yeah. Some people you won't notice. Now, that may not be enough. The other way to do it is put little Q-tips right inside your nostrils and lift it up. That works much better. So there are these devices you can get over the internet, and many of them are called like Nose-Event, Breathe with Ease, sinus cones, that you get and you put on the inside. It kind of pushes your nostrils outwards. So that works much better, but it tends to be less tolerable because it's inside your nose. So you kind of have to test out what works better for you. And so in some people, when you do the breathe right trips, it makes a dramatic difference in the quality of your sleep. Using breathe right strips. Yeah, and what they've shown is that if, and this is a very important study, if you have sleep apnea and you have nasal congestion, if you deal with the nasal congestion definitively with surgery, that cures the sleep apnea in only 10% of patients. Okay? So it does work, and when it works really well. But in most cases, it doesn't. You may breathe better, you may sleep better, but it doesn't really cure your sleep apnea. But the converse is also is that if you're completely normal and you plug your nose, let's say you have a cold and you go to sleep, that actually induces apneas.
What are they called? What you just mentioned?
If you plug your nose.
No, before that.
Breathe right strips. Breathe right strips.
Breathe right?
Breathe right.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's in the nasal section. Yes?
Breathe right is on the outside of your nose.
Right. All the others are on the inside.
Originally for athletes.
Yeah, athletes tend to use it a lot.
Okay. The others on the second row goes inside
the nose. Right.
I think you said that can improve your breathing and therefore you're sleeping, but not the apnea. Did you say that?
Right.
That doesn't make sense. If it improves your sleeping,
subjectively, patients you may feel better, but objectively, it's only a 10% cure.
To the apnea.
When you do the sleep study, based on the sleep study results.
So it has a negligible effect on apnea.
Right, but it does help.
Right. Help you feel better asleep.
Right. So if you have nasal congestion, you can't, and you're thinking about undergoing surgery, you can't think of it as a cure for your sleep apnea, but there are many other benefits to improve your nasal breathing, right? So just to be able to breathe well through your nose during the day and at night. And the important point I want to bring up here is, if your nose is stuffy, in one way or another, it's going to interfere with your sleep apnea treatment. So even if you don't do anything, your nose gets stuffy, it aggravates the apneas. But if you're using CPAP, for example, having a stuffy nose increases that resistance that the air has to go through. So your pressures have to be a little bit higher than it has to be. So in many cases, when I do a standard septoplasty or any kind of nasal procedure, and we recalibrate the pressures, it usually comes down to one or two points. And it becomes much more tolerable. So it doesn't work for everyone, but after you optimize the nasal breathing with medical or surgical therapy, CPAP can be much more tolerable. Okay. And the same thing for dental devices too, because if you're using a dental device, by putting the jaw forward, if your mouth is, many of these devices, I mean, you can breathe through the mouth, but it's not complete. So if your nose is stuffed up, you're not going to like the device as much, I mean, even though you can benefit from it. So opening up the nose can help in either situation.
Can you use the breathe right strips and then the mask?
Yes.
Can you repeat that, please?
Yeah. Can you use the breathe right strips plus the mask? Yes. But it depends on what kind of mask you use. So for example, you can use breathe rights with the nasal full mask, but if you're using a nasal pillow device interface, then you can't use the internal devices, and you don't really need the breathe rights because you're kind of bypassing it with the prongs. So let's talk about nasal saline. How many of you use nasal saline regularly? Okay, all right. So about a third, yeah. So this recommendation has been around for thousands of years. I guess it developed in India with yoga, along with yoga, and the reason why it works is saline, because it's a little saltier than your normal plasma, it actually, you know what osmosis is? Remember your basic high school chemistry? If you have a permeable membrane and you have a saltier, less salty fluid solutions, the water will go from less salty to more salty, right? To kind of equalize the concentrations. So that's what happens in your nose. So if the saline is a little saltier, and even though it's isotonic saline, which meaning it's equivalent, it tends to be a little bit saltier, so it kind of shrinks your turbinates. So that's why you feel much better after you kind of clean out your nose. But the problem is it doesn't last. So to get the full benefits from nasal saline, you have to do it on a regular basis. And many people have to use it.
How frequently do you use it?
There's no rule, whatever you need to do. So I know people who use it 4 or 5 times a day. Some people just use it once a day or once every other day.
It's not harmful to use at all.
Well, I'm going to get to that. So there's a study that came out recently. Or let me just go on here. So there are many different types of saline. There's isotonic saline, meaning that it's the same concentration as your plasma. There's also hypertonic saline, meaning it's much more concentrated, and hypotonic. What they've shown is that if you use hypertonic, so if it's too concentrated, what they've shown is that it paralyzes the cilia. You know, your mucous membranes have this finger-like blanket that pushes the mucus back. And so if you actually put a dot of ink in the front of your nose, like in 5 to 10 minutes later, you'll find that it kind of travels down your throat. So hypertonic saline, because of its effects, it paralyzes cilia. But the effect of the wash just kind of clears everything out. It just kind of pushes the mucus out, and you just feel much better.
So what's the recommendation for the percentage of salt to use?
Yeah. The general recommendation is isotonic. So there's a recipe of using, you can use the prepackaged formulas, but you can also use 2 cups of lukewarm water to 1 teaspoon of sea salt or pickling salt.
But what about the sprays?
Well, that's typically isotonic.
Is that the good one?
Yeah, isotonic, yeah.
All right, so this is 0.65 sodium.
That's hypotonic.
So that's bad.
Now, does it work for you?
I just bought it. I haven't used it yet.
Okay.
I didn't open it because.
You know what? People use various concentrations, and that's why people have different results. But why don't you experiment? Try this, and then switch to a higher concentration. See which one works better.
So you want a higher number.
Right, but experiment to see what works for you. Okay.
Can I ask you something?
Yes.
What percent did you start?
0.9% is what's called isotonic.
0.9.
Yeah. Okay. Now, you know, have you ever heard of Afrin?
Yes.
Yeah. Afrin is a very common spray that people tend to get addicted to because the nose gets stuffy and you have to use it all the time. And what Afrin is, it's a vasoconstrictant, so it constricts your blood vessels inside your nose. And what happens is, after the effect wears off, your nose comes back even more swollen. So you have to keep using it over and over again. So for short-term use, it's okay. So if you have a bad sinus infection, nasal congestion, you can use it for a couple of times, a couple of days at a time. But many people end up using it on a regular basis, like days, weeks, or years. And so these are the people who are addicted to Afrin. So, yeah, right, yeah. So, but this is not saline. But you have to realize that saline is a decongestant. And so it has the same effect as Afrin, it's just not as strong. Okay.
And if you're really in trouble, dilute the Afrin. Dilute.
You can, but it's not something that you want to get hooked on.
No,
Okay,
of course not.
right, okay. Right. Okay. So that's what's called rebound, where you have this effect that comes back with a vengeance, and that's what people have to get addicted to it. Now, there are ways of treating this. I mean, it's a pretty aggressive regimen. What I do is I give a short course of oral steroids along with, because you need massive inflammation, so you don't have to rely on the decongestant spray. I give Sudafed and a topical nasal spray, so it's kind of aggressive, but 9 out of 10 times that's enough to kind of wean you off, and we keep you on the topical nasal spray, the nasal allergy spray, and then we taper that off slowly.